So this is the second tour on our whirlwind tour of the Cyberpunk series. What this tour is going to focus on is the planning and the logistics and how I went about preparing for something like this. A lot of people ask me how I planned this. And by the way, if you want to see that in real time, you can go back, you can find the VODs. Everything's on YouTube, right? And you can find them and you can watch me struggle and figure it out in real time. All right. And starting from, just building the very first platforms for this city and where I went from there and how I figured out the roads and all this stuff, right? It's all live, it's all available. But we're going to kind of talk about it from a larger perspective and how I went about organizing the logistics of the entire map, and then the factory plans and my process. And then once we get through that, then we'll be able to understand kind of the place of each of these buildings and the factories inside them a little bit better if we do this planning tour and explanation a little bit up front. So again, we are up here at the top of the Cyberpunk City. This is it. We are done and we're enjoying one last ride. The first thing that I want to talk about is the logistics of the subfloor, of the subway. Okay, and then we'll kind of work backwards. All right, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna go down here and I want to show you guys the logistics. Okay, now what I've chosen to do is use trains to bring up all raw materials. The raw materials, the ores, everything gets made in the factories, but they come up into this subway. Okay, and you can see from underneath where the factories are. This is the 4 round buildings over there. Those are the shard is way in the corner. That's the steel factory, the twisty building. We've got the other factories there. This is the power plant, the Fixmas factory, and this is Arasaka Tower. Okay, so you can kind of see the underneath. I do have a train spiral. This is a blueprint that I designed. I actually did it with a vanilla method. There was at one point a way for you to build outside of the blueprint maker. That method got patched, so you can no longer do that. If you want to build a blueprint that's this big, you have 2 options. You can download a mod that gives you giant blueprints, blueprint makers, or you can use Satisfactory or SCIM, the browser. You upload your save file and you can select a building and you can make a mega print out of it. I could technically make a mega print of the entire city. But that would be how you would do this in the future. But that is my train spiral. And we have 2 lanes of trains coming up here. Now, this is going to be important later. These trains need to have very specific things on them. This factory needs very specific things. This factory happens to need a bunch of oil. Okay, it needs other items. Bauxite, SAM ore, a little bit of everything over here. Question that I will propose to you is, where does the train come from? Where does this train come from that is loaded with the exact items that I need to be in this train station? Where do I put that? Where does that come from? All right, that is the crux of the question that we are trying to solve. All right, so we're going to talk about the logistics part of that in just a second. Before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about planning, because when I built this city, I planned a very large part of it ahead of time. And I planned the factories to work together. Again, because of logistics, right? The factories needed to pass each other parts. I'm passing plastic that I'm making somewhere else into this factory with my trucks. Okay, and so I have the subway logistics bringing in raw materials, and then I have the surface logistics, the trucks. You can see them, they're bopping around all over here. They transfer items between the factories. But I needed to plan all this at least somewhat before I built anything, because how big do I need to make my very first factory? If my very first factory is making wire, I need to know how much wire the other factories need, right? So they're all interconnected. And so essentially what I ended up doing is planning 5 factories all at the same time. I planned these 4. There's one hiding on the other side of that one. And I planned the power plant, because that makes the rubber and the plastic. And these 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, work together. And then this power plant also provides the rubber and the plastic for phase 4 and around the corner, Arasaka Tower, which is phase 5. This tower in the center is central storage, and then that's my Fixmas factory, Nakatomi Plaza. So those are my 2 logistics layers. The one up here is actually far more simple, but it required a lot of upfront planning. And so let's talk about those plans and kind of how I went about doing it. So I use Satisfactory Tools. I get a lot of people asking why I don't use Modeler. I know that basically every other streamer, except for me, uses Modeler. I like this a lot. Number one, I know how to use it, and we're always biased to the tools we understand. I did try to use Modeler, and Modeler is prettier. And frankly, it's in the name. I feel like Satisfactory Tools is a better planner. I feel like Modeler is a better modeler, okay? You can do planning with it, but I found it to be clunky, okay? I like being able to very quickly throw in the items that I want and have it build the tree for me, okay? Now the tree itself is a lot more mutable, okay? It changes all the time and it's kind of ugly, right? Like you can't even read that, right? You got to start moving shit around. I get it, okay? But for me, having the flexibility is way more important. I mean, look at that, right? You got, you got to like move that so that you can see it and shit. I get it. And by the way, this is a small factory. Okay, if we look at the phase 5 factory, just for reference here, I mean, look at this. I mean, look at that. Okay, I get it. Okay, people don't like this, but I don't care. I would rather be able to see the connections in a complex factory here than the way Modeler works. But that's just me. If you like Modeler, then you should use Modeler. But I use Satisfactory Tools, and this is why. Now, I also use Excel to help me translate this in an actionable plan in the game. Reaper, I saw a short where you had turbo fuel properly show up on that tool. How are you able to do that? Let's do a quick little demo. I actually did a little demo in the prior tour earlier tonight that I recorded, where I was comparing the vanilla fuel recipe with the diluted packaged fuel recipe, and the fact that you get 4 times the amount of fuel for the same amount of oil. So what we could do here is we could add on to this, right? So we know we're gonna get 600, and this is basically how I would plan the factory. I would be like, all right, well, okay, we're gonna get 600 fuel I figured that out by hitting maximize here. Let me zoom in a little bit here. I figured that out by hitting maximize. I know that 600 oil, that's my limiting factor. If I hit maximize, it gives me 1600 fuel. Now what I can do is I can go items per minute and I can say 1600 fuel. Okay, and get the maximize out of there. Okay, so then let's say I'm like, you know what? I want to do some turbo fuel. So what we can do is, and I want to use the turbo fuel recipe. There's 2 turbo fuel recipes, right? Actually, there's 3. Turbo blend fuel. This is the blender version. Most people making turbo fuel. If you're at blenders, don't make turbo fuel. Heavy fuel, it's these 2. Turbo heavy fuel or turbo fuel. Okay. I like this one because it uses fuel. And again, the diluted packaged fuel and the heavy oil residue combo can't be beaten. It is so good. And so I use this one to take advantage of the fact that I'm being given a crap ton more fuel. Okay. So what are we going to do? Well, I'm going to, using this tool, turn on the recipe for turbo fuel. You have to turn on the alternate recipes. Now you can hit all right, and then you can turn off the base recipes. If you do, and in that way, you can massage what comes out over here by limiting the recipes and limiting the inputs. How I limited the oil, I went over here to items input and I went down here to oil and I typed in 600. All right, and that way it limited my universe in this way. So I'm gonna keep the 600 crude oil, and I've got heavy oil residue turned on. I've got diluted packaged fuel turned on, and I just turned on the turbo fuel recipe that I wanted turned on. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say that I want turbo fuel, and I'm going to say that I want to maximize it. Unfortunately, we cannot calculate any result. Why? Let's see. We're missing something. We're missing a way to make compacted coal, I bet. We have to turn that on. And now it can happen. Here is our maximum amount of turbo fuel that we can make with 600 crude oil. Now, there's a catch, and it's this little buddy. Reanimated Sam. It says, oh, you want maximum? I'll give you maximum. And it sets up a converter. Well, we don't want that. So how do we do that? Well, what we could do is we could turn off the available machines of converters. And now it's not trying to give us maximum with the converter trick. Okay. Now, the irony is we still get the same amount of turbo fuel, which is kind of crazy if you think about it, but it is what it is. So this refinery, packager, refinery assembler. This, by the way, this is my recipe exactly for my Gold Coast factory. But this is how I would use this, and this is how I have used it. And then again, now that I've hit maximum and I've let it calculate the maximum amount of turbo fuel, I then will change this number out to what I know is the maximum. And then I would continue to plan the factory. I would be like, all right, well, what are we going to do this polymer resin? All right, well, we're going to make some plastic. We're going to make some rubber. By the way, do you see the ratio of heavy oil residue to polymer resin? Where heavy oil residue, the recipe gives you more heavy oil residue than polymer resin. But there is a recipe that gives you the reverse. So if you need more polymer resin than fuel, you can use some of your refineries in the reverse recipe so that you can get some more plastic and rubber if you have plenty of fuel. So again, we're doing a crash course here on Satisfactory Tools, but that's okay. what we're going to do now is I want to talk to you about kind of how I designed this. Look at these numbers. These numbers are stupid, right? 33.735, 809.96. Why did I do this? Well, the reason that I do this is because, do you see how I have some extras here? These are going to my storage. Not this. That's something else. I'll show you that in a second. But this iron plate is going to my storage, not the concrete as well. The iron rod is going to my storage, okay? Do I care if iron plate is 30 per minute going to my storage over the course of 200 hours? Or 33 per minute, or 41 per minute? Do I care? I don't. I don't care. Do you know what I do care about? I care about that building this is a whole number, because that's easier factory to build. Why is this a weird number? Because it's the leftovers making reinforced iron plate, so I can build 21 assemblers exactly. And then that needs 236.25 iron plate. I make a little bit left over to bank. And now I have 21 assemblers making adhered iron plate and 6 foundries making steel cast plate. And who cares that it's 0.75 and 0.3735? I don't care. And so I did the math to ask for it in the exact amount that it would give me whole numbered buildings. So that's how I set this up. That's why these are weird numbers. Okay. So this factory and each of these factories has 2 goals. Number 1, to provide me materials for central storage. Okay. That can be an actual central storage, or it could just be storing it decentralized and uploading it to a dimensional depot. It doesn't matter. But what this represents is my building materials. Okay. And by the way, you build yourself huge storages. You don't have to build huge factories. Build huge storages so that this 48 per minute stacks and stacks and stacks. Make 20 industrial storages. The big boys. Make 40. Who cares? Okay, store it up so that when you need it, you have an infinite amount of iron rods. Now, next tour, I'm going to talk about how to get around. Next video in this series, this tour series, I'm going to tell you a method that I came up with of getting around the dimensional depot upload limit of 240 per minute. You can stack them. Okay, if you feed iron rods into 2 separate dimensional depot uploaders, you get 480. When you're designing your factories, keep that in mind. Now, again, there's 2 jobs for this factory. Number 1, provide me materials to build shit with. Okay. Central storage. Number 2, feeding items to other factories, because it's more efficient to just make all my wire here and then hand that wire off to a factory that needs it. Now, could I have just made the wire at the other factory? Yes. Frankly, I wanted to use trucks. I told you I have the logistics passing materials from this factory to that factory. Well, that's what's in them, is things like that wire, that extra wire. Now, how do you do that in Satisfactory Tools? Now, Modeler, I will give Modeler credit. It has a great way of passing this wire made in this factory to the other factory. Tools doesn't have that. But what Tools does have is, if we go over to the heavy modular frame factory, Tools does have an items input. And look, wire 3520. Okay, and if we go to the production, you can see that it's an input. Okay, and so now my factory over here can be more simplified because I'm passing in wire, reinforced iron plate, and concrete. So that's an example of how these factories interconnect, and also trying to give you a little bit of insight on how I planned these. Again, I think I did an entire VOD or even two planning out these initial factories. By the way, I do want to show you that the shard, the very first factory that we made, it has an input as well. It has rubber. I'm not making rubber here. I'm making rubber in that factory. Now, the difficult thing is that I built this factory before I built that factory. So how did I hand it rubber? Well, I handed it rubber because I was making rubber at the Gold Coast, and I just droned it up. And then once I built that factory, I replaced the droned up rubber from the Gold Coast with the trucked rubber from this factory. All right. So I just kind of modularly built out these pieces. That is kind of a quick, basic run through of how I did the factory planning. Now, I want to show you how I did some of the spatial planning. And what I ended up doing is I basically I turned Google Docs into graph paper. And each one of these squares represents a foundation. And I counted them out. And these are my roads. There's my fuel station. These are my roads. This is the computer factory footprint. That's the shard footprint. This is the aluminum factory, the Mercury City Tower footprint. And this is the heavy modular frames factory footprint. And I had my spaces, and I know how much sidewalk I wanted. I knew how much road I wanted. All right. And then I planned out my highways that were all leading out of the central storage. And this helped me plan my roads and make my blueprint road system, because I was able to know, and I started setting limits for myself, right? Because if I know that my blueprint is only, 3 foundations wide per lane, well, then I can make sure that I've got 6 plus a sidewalk on each side, right? And so that's kind of how I started laying out the physical part of the factory. And it was great because the roads are blueprints and they are copyable and they're the same every time. Now there's still some funky shapes and stuff, right? And, we dealt with that by, there's some leftover kind of spaces here and there. But overall, I think it was pretty good. I ended up doing some overpasses and did some fun stuff in here. And I do a lot of blueprints, guys, a lot, right? Even this corner is a blueprint. Each of these roads are a blueprint. Even these truck paths are a blueprint. Okay. The freeway system is a blueprint. Okay. All of these road chunks are blueprints. When in doubt, just use blueprints. So that kind of talks about how I plan the factories, and then also how I plan the layout of the city. And next, what I want to do is I want to go back to what I hinted at a little while ago, which is thinking about this train situation. I've talked about the planning portions of the city itself, and we talked about the subway here, but I asked a question: where does this train come from that has a bunch of oil on it? Now, I actually think the oil is a pretty easy answer, because oil is grouped together naturally on the map. You've got 4 or 5 different places the oil is. This is a little bit more interesting. Copper, iron, coal, limestone, quartz crystal. That train needs some of everything. Where does that train come from? Where do you load the exact specific things that you need? Not for just this one train station. For all 4 of these train stations. For each of the factories. See where I'm going with this? Look at this train. Okay, it's got a bunch of liquid and then it's got 2 solids on it. Same thing with that one. It's probably actually the return trip of the same one. That one is all liquids. Okay, everybody needs their own setup because every factory's input needs are different. So when I went to try to figure out this question, I realized that it would be a lot better if I made a staging area, or as Max says, an intermediate logistics warehouse, a raw resource hub. And so I did. I did make one. And we're gonna look at it. Now, when I first envisioned this playthrough, my vision was that I was gonna build nuclear. And I wanted to do it in a big building in the Dune Desert that is iconic for cyberpunk. Do you know the first real cyberpunk movie? The movie that is credited with starting the visual genre of cyberpunk? That movie is Blade Runner. And I wanted to build the Tyrell Corporation pyramid from Blade Runner in a nuclear power plant in the Dune Desert. However, when I built my rocket fuel factory or designed it, I realized that I don't need nuclear. And so I pivoted. I realized I did need a train hub. And so I built the Tyrell Corporation pyramid in Satisfactory, and I made it my train hub. I made it my raw resource hub. I made it the intermediate logistics warehouse. This took me 100 hours to make. It was worth it. This is the my most favorite thing I've ever built. Satisfactory. And by the way, you can see the trains coming in. Look at the pulling in raw resources. Okay, there's one in the swamp. Okay, there's a bunch over there. Let's see if we can get high enough. You can barely see it over there. Yeah, there it is. On the Spire Coast, that's where we're getting most of the oil. And they come in here. Here's the bauxite train. All right, they come in here and they load. Well, actually they unload. All right, I've got water trains. I've got oil trains. All right, and actually I did 10 cars. Okay, so 2 locomotives for 10 cars. What you want is a train can go up a ramp of 2 meters over 8. Okay. This is a 2 meter over 8 ramp. Okay, so this is a 2 rise over an 8 meter run, also known as the 2 meter ramp. A loaded train can go up this at this incline as long as you do 1 train to every 5 cars. If you do 1 train to 6 cars, it can't make it up there. That's why I did 2 trains for 10 cars. Now, I also have a little bit of an advantage because we're going downhill. And so in most cases, especially up on where the bauxite is on the plateau, the train, when it goes up, is empty. It's when it comes down that it's fully loaded. Okay, so that's why I have 2 locomotives, one at the beginning, one at the end, and we can move our 10 cars. Now, how I've set this up is I've basically built hubs and like scooped up the materials where they make sense to be scooped up. Now, I'm just using this as an example. These aren't actually the locations. I think I have a train here. I actually do think I'm pulling in all of this actually. I've got, you can't see it cut it off, but there's some Caterium up there. And then there's a water train up there as well. The bauxite is over here, right? And these trains grab whatever is in the area and take it to the hub, okay? I've also got, because of course I do, tracking, okay? These are the 10 train cars that are coming in. And look at this, okay? Look at, this is the East Titan Forest, okay? Which is actually right here. Crystal, Caterium, 2 limestone, 2 irons, coal, and a sand ore. And look at the different factories that are using them. Okay, the Shard, Hancock, United Tower. Okay, look at this one. Shard, United Tower, Hancock. Most of the rest of this is phase 4 and phase 5. But these are the trains that are coming in and bringing the materials, and then we're shipping them out. So the materials come in, and then they need to be reshuffled. Now, I initially thought that this hub was for storage, but you cannot think about this in terms of raw numbers. You have to think about this in terms of flow, okay? What is your items per minute? What does your, because look at your factories. This isn't 20,000 limestone. It's 900 per minute. So storage, who cares about storage? You need a little storage to buffer trains, okay? But you're not actually storing it. You are just harnessing and directing flow, per minute flow, okay? Now, really quickly, I don't want to go too much into trains here, but we are talking about logistics and planning in this tour. That is turning into a tutorial a little bit. But how trains work is that when a train is unloading or loading from a platform, these belts shut off. Okay, watch. This is full, and now it's empty. Okay, so how do you make sure that you get a good flow, in this case 780 because I'm using a Mark V, when your belt's shut off? You're never going to get 780 if the belt's shut off. Well, this is how you do it, okay? You bring 2 belts through so that when it's not unloading or loading, it makes up for the time that it is. And then you do 1 belt out. And that's why I have this set up over and over and over again. And by the way, you have to do the same thing with fluids. I just saw a Kibitz video that said something like, unironically using fluids for trains. And I thought it was funny because I've been using fluids for trains for years, bro. This is the setup. Okay. Same thing with oil. Now, I'm only relying on 600 here because this shuts off, and I'm not going to get 600 if I just do 1 pipe. So I'm bringing 2 pipes to make up for the shutoff. All right, so now what happens after they come in here? Well, what they do is we've got a logistics floor, okay? I do want to talk about a belt balancer. Where's a good example of a belt balancer? I have a lot of time on belt balancers. We're not going to talk about them in too much detail right now, but this is actually, where's an easy one? This is a complex belt balancer. This is an easy one. Look at this. I am balancing 3 to 2. Okay. This guy gets split in there. This is the same thing. These are all coal. Okay. What I do here is how many to how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to 5. So this is a 5 to 5. What I do for these belt balancers is I like to do it when they go into trains and when they come out of trains, especially all the same item. If I have a bunch of cars of the same item on a train, I try to do belt balancing because it just helps in the long run deal with it. It's like a self-correcting mechanism. Okay. And basically all I do here is I split one belt into 5, and then I merge those 5 or this is 1/5 of the flow of this. And then I take all the 1/5 of all the 5 and I merge them all together. And now this belt is 1/5 of all the other inputs. This is the 2/5 of all the other inputs, and so on. And what this does is it makes sure that I've got a self-correcting mechanism if I'm backed up on one and I have extra on another. Okay. And then these go up into the top floor where the materials get loaded into the exact format that we asked about earlier. Exactly how my factory needs it. Okay, Caterium, iron, Caterium, limestone, copper. Who cares where it came from on the map? I don't care. I just care that the flow is accounted for. So this is how my logistics hub works. Now we're going to take a ride back in the man cannon so that we can see the city. And our next tour is going to go over central storage and my Fixmas factory. I've got an entire series of tours on the last VOD of this playthrough, and you can either watch the VOD or this series of videos. So we're going to talk about my Fixmas factory and central storage, and I'm going to explain my workaround for the problem that dimensional depots only upload 240 per minute. That's like a Mark III belt. Okay. Dimensional depots have a weakness. How do you work around it? I'm going to tell you how I worked around it in the next video.